Lately, I've been doing tons of level design for my game that's a mix between Zelda and Pokemon, and you might be thinking that those two games clash a bit, right? But how it works is that you explore a Zelda-styled world, but instead of using items to progress, you catch creatures and use their abilities. The game is called Synth Beasts, and let me take you on the journey of developing levels for the game. So the first thing that I do to make levels is make a map of the layout and label it with what I want each part to do. So this example here is from the first area of the game, and of course, since it's where you'll be encountering many mechanics for the first time, the level has to teach you all of that. You start at point 14, and then as you head up, you encounter points 4 and 8 for the first time. So point 4 corresponds to teaching how to attack, and then point 8 corresponds to teaching the player about breakable crates. And it makes sense to combine them, right? So yeah, this first section here teaches you how to attack and break things, and then there's a second area that does the same to reinforce the concept, and then after that there's point 1, which is a combat encounter. This point 1's objective is to teach you how to use what you just learned, which is just attacking, in combination with what most players already know how to do, which is moving. So I basically sketch out the whole level like this with all of the new things that I want the level to teach, and once I'm done with that, I get to the next part. Whiteboxing is a part of the game development process that I feel many developers that start out ignore because they feel that it will slow them down and that it's not really necessary for a game of non-AAA complexity, and I definitely was one of these developers at one point, but let me tell you, I was so wrong. When I first made my first commercial game, Lootbox Life, I didn't do any of this, and so the iteration process took way longer than it needed to. My second commercial game, Box, was geometric looking in general, so there wasn't really such a thing as whiteboxing because the levels themselves were as easy to make as white boxes since the visuals were really basic. And ever since then, I realized the value in structuring the level creation process in such a way that made iteration fast, and so, of course, I applied that philosophy to Synth Beasts as well. And here you can see the first ever white box that I made for the level that I showed you before that I sketched out, and it really holds up quite well. But you'll see that over multiple iterations it changes, and that is only really possible to do at this scale because you don't spend tons and tons of energy making things look nice. Although I do recommend adding some sort of cool prototype texture to make the level geometry a bit nicer, because at least for me it helps satisfy my stupid brain and tricks it into thinking I'm looking at something cooler than it actually is. In general, this process really takes quite a while, and what I end up doing is I send the game to friends to test it out and get feedback, and then I change the level according to their feedback. And here are some parts that you can compare between the original sketch and the white box so you can see how my annotations translate into actual gameplay. So this section here was meant to teach dashing and then retroactive locks, and you can see that the dashing translated quite well, but I actually put the lock a bit after the dash part because of the feedback that I got. Here's another section that was supposed to teach you how you can use fireballs to hit switches from a distance, and there are 2 back-to-back switches to teach that. But again, because of the feedback, this ended up changing. And so how it ended up working is that there's a singular of these puzzles at first, and then 2 more after a combat, since it felt a bit dull and repetitive otherwise, so the combat in the middle kind of broke things up a bit. And the final example for this section is the area for the boss. And initially, I wanted to make the player use what they had learned in terms of using their ranged attacks, and so these 2 wings were supposed to have buttons that you could hit from afar and then access the boss. But when I actually started implementing all of this, it felt way too convoluted, especially for the first boss, and so I ended up going with a way more elegant solution, which was to have a gap between the player and the boss, which literally forced you to use ranged attacks to deal damage, so that just worked way better overall. Decorating is a section that I think many of you will find interesting. It's actually a really involved process, but I have something to confess first. So remember how I said that I don't decorate at all until after the white box? Well, that's actually not entirely true, because before I do any whiteboxing or any sketching at all, the first thing that I do is actually make a little decorated mock-up. And the purpose of this is not really to make something that looks like the final game, but it's more so to give myself the confidence that I will be able to turn it into something that looks like a final game by the end of the decoration process. It's kind of like a feasibility test to check myself to be like, okay, do I have everything that I need to make this game a reality throughout the entire process? So for Synth Beasts, this was the first try of the mockup, and you can see that I tried to make it look a bit darker as if it was nighttime at first, and then I tested out some more bright visual styles and it felt like a much better fit, so that's what I ended up going with. Something else that I tested at this point that I think is really cool is some cool camera angles like this one here, and all of this combined gave me the confidence to believe that I could make Synth Beast look cool and like something that people would want to play. This is a bit of a detour, but something that's interesting as well is that you can really notice that at the end of the mockup, it looks really empty. And while this is partially due to the fact that I felt that I didn't need to decorate anymore to prove the game's viability to myself, I distinctly remember that I was struggling to find ways to populate the level. And what's funny though, is that going through the same process after having done the initial sketch completely eliminated this feeling. So if you weren't already convinced about doing an intense sketch of your levels, maybe this will. So now that we're past our little detour, how did I actually decorate Synth Beast? Well, I firstly tried to do a pass where I try to match the visuals of the mockup, and for this game, it looked like this. And it looks fine, but if you check the game's trailers, the world looks way fuller, so how did this end up happening? And well, I feel that there's only one real way to do this, and that's to get a lot of critical feedback. So get your most critical friends to play the game, or even just look at the footage and screenshots and get them to roast your visuals. And one particular issue that I had with the first tries at this was that the environment was way too sparse, and I was doing this actually because I was worried about the Switch performance. But after I got the feedback that I needed to get, I kind of snapped out of it and stopped thinking so much about the Switch version of the game since it was negatively affecting the other versions. And in the end, if you're interested, the way that I solved this was I separated non-essential decor into a separate game object that was just the parent to all of them. So if I wanted to make the game more optimized for Switch, I could just disable that game object and it would work fine because none of the really detailed stuff would render. And so that ended up working perfectly, and as you can see here, I made a test build on my Switch dev kit, so in the end my approach worked, and the visual fidelity of the game on other platforms wasn't sacrificed either. And I really want to show off some comparison shots, so here's what the first spot looked like in the white box, and here's what it looks like fully decorated. And here's another example with the first boss where you can see the white box on the left, and here's the decorated level on the right. And finally, for this set of examples, here's the combat arena that had the door locked behind you in the white box version, and here's that same spot fully decorated. I actually have Synth Beast's Steam page live right now, so wishlist the game if you've liked the video, as it really helps boost the game in the Steam algorithm. And another bonus is that a game in the same universe as Synth Beasts called Wanted Shadows is actually on sale right now for the Steam Winter Sale that just went live right now this second, and it only costs $1.20, so it's a complete steal. And if you actually already own my other game, Soulstalker, which you can see on the screen right now, you can get an additional discount, so check out the bundle below. And you bet that when Synth Beast comes out, you'll also get a nice discount on it if you own Wanted Shadows. So that $120 right now is going to get you even further in the future. Anyways, that's it for this video, and I'll see you again next week for the final one of the year. See you.